Hello and welcome. You're viewing the Citizens Journalist podcast, Mesa County Compass, that brings you the news that you can use from a different point of view. I'm Ruth.
I'm Lisa.
And together we are Mesa County Compass. Our goal is to create an informed, current, active citizenry armed with the facts. We will be covering what's new to you, what it means to you, what you can do about it, and provide you access to the decision makers when we can. Good afternoon. We're here with Mesa County Compass, and this afternoon we're having Matt Soper, our state representative, with us. He's going to discuss a few items that we are interested in, such as what is going on in the state from his perspective. We need an update. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good, and we're glad you're here. I wanted to start by just saying how I want you to know how amazing and how lucky we are to have you as a representative.
Thank you.
I have experienced personally your willingness to reach out to me as a constituent when I had a problem, but also to kind of work around what the Democratic Party does in terms of holding down our state. And I know that you have done several international trade deals with different countries to bring people to the Western Slope, to help us in our economy. And I don't know if you want to talk about a few of those things. And the other thing I see is that you are at so many events and people ask you to do something and you're there.
It's so accessible.
Yes,
thank
so
you.
accessible.
Thank you very much.
And you get right back to people. And I think that that's amazing.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes. We feel listened to.
Oh, thank you. It kind of goes back to when I first thought about running for the State House, I met our state representative then, who was Matt Smith, and I sat back and I said, if I ever have the chance to represent my community in the state legislature, I want to be the representative that I thought a representative should be. And that's someone who is involved in each of the communities they represent, who's accessible, who doesn't just come around once a year for the Lincoln Day dinner, but that actually is making an impact in their communities and is part of each of their communities. So that's why my wife and I will randomly choose a time to go to the furthest part of the district. It may be a gateway, we'll spend a night, meet with a few folks down there, but really also just to see parts. And then we have volunteered at the Peach Fest in Palisade, and at the Fruit of Fall Festival, and try to really be part of the communities that we represent, not just showing up for a parade, but actually getting in and volunteering and being part of the community activities throughout the year.
Makes so much difference.
It does.
We do appreciate that.
And how do you do that with work? Because I know, I know that you're an attorney as well. And so how do you work that around so that you can be a dad, a husband, a worker bee, and a representative?
Yeah, it's quite hard. So it helps that we don't have kids.
I thought you guys did have kids.
No, so that part helps. The other thing is I don't practice law just because this job really is a full-time job. It's kind of a misnomer that we've continued to feed ourselves that the state legislature is this true citizen legislature. I mean, it sounds good on paper when you write it all down that you're going to go off to Denver for 4 months and then you're going to come back to your regular profession. But if you think about it, it's never worked that way. Even from the founding of our nation, most of our founding fathers were some of the wealthiest men in the nation. They could leave their farms or their law practice because they had many other people who were taking care of business for them. And they also had enough money in the bank account that if they didn't work for a few years, it didn't really hurt much. And that's still the same today with representation at the state level. No employer would let you leave your job for 4 months and then welcome you back.
No.
I mean, that's just not the case.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is why it really is a full-time job. And no constituent really wants to think that the only time they can reach out to the representative is when the legislature's in session. I mean, when you have a problem, it may happen in the interim, and I can't say, I'm sorry, this is my time to be doing my other job. Wait until I go back into session. It just doesn't work that way. And so it really is constant. And then to really know your district and all that's happening, you need to be involved in your district. And so most representatives today, they either come from a moneyed background, or they wait until they're older and they're retired, and so they have more time, well, and their retirement income that's going to be coming in, or they're young and a activist, and this is the highest paid job they've ever had, so they think they've just like struck the lottery. Or in my case, you have a spouse who's really supportive and is the breadwinner of the family.
Oh, nice.
And
Okay.
so that tends to be what happens if you're not a retiree.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
Well, now I want to pick on the state
Sure, absolutely.
because we've talked before, and so many of our issues, because the Democrats have a supermajority in both houses, and it's very difficult for you to get something done, even through compromise. So in what ways do you think that the state, and by that I mean the legislature and the governor, have impacted some of the problems that we're seeing? Inflation, rising house prices, crime, immigration, all of those things. Homelessness, yes.
Everything you mentioned has been impacted by the state, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because as I've thought about, especially the difference between the state and the federal government, we're approaching Constitution Day, and dual federalism is real. And most people in their daily lives will be impacted by the decisions of the state legislature and the governor. If I were to ask either one of you, well, what has Congress or the president done that impacts your daily lives? You might actually struggle to think of what that would be. But when it comes to how has the legislature impacted your daily lives, you probably have a grocery list of things that you could keep track of.
Yeah.
And that's just because so much that we as a state have control over impacts citizens' lives. I mean, going to war, signing treaties, the coinage of money, those are all things the federal government does that may have a secondary impact. But the legislature can create laws, as we did this year, that further creates a wedge between landlords and tenants. So it allows the tenant more rights and the landlord less rights during eviction proceedings. And now it could take up to 3 months to get a tenant out of the apartment if there's a conflict between the landlord and the tenant and they need to be evicted. It's one where we debated a lot, but when it comes to that point in time, the healthy outcome is really for the eviction to happen more quickly.
Exactly.
And I even found a middle ground approach there. I said it did seem pretty unfair that we require the person who's being evicted to pay a court filing fee to file their answer.
Right.
So we passed a bill that removed that fee, so that now when they're filing their answer for why they shouldn't be evicted, they don't have to also add a significant fee on top of it.
And actually a little bit more fair for them.
It is, yeah, no, absolutely. But other things that the Democrats and the supermajority have done that have really impacted housing prices and homelessness, one would be drugs. I mean, the fact that last year we basically finished off decriminalizing almost every drug in Colorado, and then there was the grand compromise bill. And I say compromise with air quotes because we've had a series of these big compromise bills that A, don't feel like a compromise, and B, at the end of the day, don't really help our state. Actually, it's made our state worse. And so with the big drug compromise bill from last year, they got rid of the wobbler, which I was in support of. It actually started here in Mesa County, and in exchange...
And what's a wobbler?
Yeah, I'll explain it.
Sorry.
Yeah, so
He was leading
Yeah.
up, right?
in exchange for having a drug misdemeanor, you had to complete drug treatment. But if you didn't complete drug treatment, then it wobbled up, or wobbled down, depending on which way you're looking at it, to being a drug felony. So that there was a strong-arm tool that if you were arrested on a drug possession charge or drug distribution charge, that if you went through the full battery of treatments, then the felony would go away and you would just have a misdemeanor on your record, which is much better. You wouldn't be looking at prison time. There's so many other things that wouldn't come into play, such as voting rights or gun ownership. I mean, all that would would not even be in question, and you could clear up a misdemeanor very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But it also meant that you as a person would be helped from drug treatment.
Right.
Well, they got rid of that because they were saying, well, it's not the fault of the person if they're using drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did somebody force them on?
Yeah,
They
exactly.
held them down.
Yeah. I mean, I get that, addicts may have a difficult time, but it is an individual choice. And it's an impact on society as well.
Mm-hmm.
And your choice, even at first, if it comes back around to be in a position where you really have to make the decision of, okay, I need help. But if the fact that you're not seeking help and you're committing assaults and burglaries and other heinous crimes, then it does affect all of us.
Yes,
and it affects us on a state. And that's not an excuse. I mean, the fact that you were high or drunk and committed a crime, that's just not an excuse at all. And what the Democrats have done with a series of bills have changed all that, from decriminalizing drug possession to getting rid of the mechanisms we had to get people treatment, has now meant that the homeless problem is on the rise in Colorado, and it will be because word gets around the nation that we're an easy state and that you can go into stores and steal. So if it's under, I believe the current cutoff is $7,000 between misdemeanor and felony.
Wow.
So you can steal a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But that would put some mom and pop operations out of business.
Oh, absolutely. And that's been a real struggle, even in Grand Junction. I've talked to a lot of the mom and pop stores. They're like, Matt, at least some real teeth in this, because when they call the police, they say, well, if it's a misdemeanor, they'll go down, they'll arrest them. Then they'll get a personal recognizance bond. They'll be back out on the streets by that afternoon, and they may be stealing and reoffending right away.
Or go back and get what they left behind.
Yeah, exactly. And while there is a principle in law that a shopkeeper has the ability to protect inventory in the store, just because you have that mechanism in law doesn't protect you from the person suing the shopkeeper in tort law for assault.
Now that just is totally out of my realm of thinking. It just, you should not have to worry about that at all.
I agree.
If you're getting robbed, so to speak, you should be able to stop them any way you can, as long as they're within your walls.
Yep. So that's that's been one example of why homelessness is on the rise, is that we've basically legalized all drugs. We've taken penalties away for possession and made it a lot less for distribution. We have further legalized at the ballot box psilocybin or magic mushrooms. Of course, we'd legalized marijuana before, which is often cited as the gateway drug for many of the harder drugs. Fentanyl is in every single drug in Colorado. Every single one. That's not just a truism, that's a statement that we find it everywhere. And our state knows that we have a major problem. The Democrats know that it comes out of Mexico via China, so the raw goods will go from China to Mexico. It's fabricated down there and brought across with cartels and illegals to our state. And we're a major trafficking state because I-70 runs across the nation, I-25 runs up. It's a perfect location for transit corridor. I mean, that's why businesses have done well here, is because we're a good transit corridor state. But that's also why drugs and human trafficking are big here as well. And so a number of our homeless will be drug addicts who are out on the streets. The Democrats also did a good job at getting rid of the state hospital and any sort of mental health treatment. I mean, we talk about it all the time.
Right.
But they want to just do counselors who come into the home and who hold the person's hand and they say, I'm going to listen, you'll get better.
The kumbaya moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's not real treatment.
No.
I mean, we need a true state hospital or state hospital system for a reason, because there's probably about a third of our homeless that have severe mental health problems and are not getting better.
Yes.
And they actually are in the worst position that they can be out on the streets. I mean, I've seen some of the worst people in Denver. I mean, individuals who are crippled, who I've seen people, even one man asking if I could help finish pushing the needle in his arm.
Gosh.
Oh my Lord.
I mean, just things that I never thought I would see. And that, of course, was probably a drug addict, but other people who are talking to themselves, and they'll walk right past you having a very animated conversation, and you realize they don't see you, and they have all these friends that are invisible.
They don't have a cell phone. They're not talking in the earpiece.
Yeah.
Right.
So they do need help, and it really is, in some ways, failing our moral side as a society to not provide that help.
And their argument is that it's inhumane to lock them up against their
That's correct. Yeah.
their will.
Yeah.
And yet it is inhumane to treat them like animals or worse.
Yeah, or to leave them on the streets and to watch as, a number of them, if you look closely, they've had fingers or toes amputated because they have been out when it's gotten into the sub-temperatures
Frostbite.
and gotten major frostbite. And tell me that's not inhumane to
Oh, it's horrible.
to leave them on the
We
street
wouldn't
without
leave
help.
our dog or cat out in
No.
that kind of weather. Why do we leave our people out?
Yeah. And so I do believe we can do better, but the Democrats also don't want the homeless to go away. And the reason I say that is every time I sit back and I listen to debates on the floor of the House of Representatives, usually what comes up is the Democrats will talk about all the homeless and why we need to go after landlords so that homeless have a place to live, or why we need more government capped rental prices so that the homeless have a place to live, or why we need socialized medicine with price controls for pharmaceuticals so that homeless can afford the drugs. I mean, it's just their excuse for everything. And they're pointing at these folks out on the street who I'm sure have no clue that they get used day in and day out for justifying the rollout of socialism in Colorado.
Wow, that's an eye-opener.
Right.
I mean, I knew all of this in the back of my mind, but when you say it, it makes so much difference. I do understand. I can see through what experiences I have, and there haven't been like yours by any means. Mine have just been on the streets of Grand Junction, but
It's getting rough here.
it's changing. So, yeah.
And a lot of times how they want to fund things is through making it more expensive for a developer to have. I know that one of the things that they're talking about here is the linkage fees, because they want to create a way to provide housing for the homeless and make the developer responsible for providing part of that monies.
And then it goes back, of course, to the home buyer
Oh, absolutely.
or the landlord.
Well, you asked me also about housing prices
Right.
and just the cost of housing here in Colorado. I mean, one thing that the Democrats have done that's really led to an increase in housing has been not actually solving construction defects. So right now, Colorado has several major court precedences that sit out there where HOAs, homeowners associations, have sued the developer for construction defects and have won major settlements and damages. Well, that now means that it's such a long period of time, I believe it's 20 years, that the construction company and developer are still liable, that's a long time to carry liability after something has been built, which means that just the cost of construction alone has to increase because a developer has to keep back some within a bond to be able to fight a potential lawsuit 20 years down the road,
Right.
or even 20 years after they've sold or wound up the company and the owner's long since retired. They still could be on the hook.
And that's one thing that I learned through real estate was that was definitely the way it was, and it was just getting increasingly worse as time went on.
Yeah.
So yes.
Well, and it creates them not wanting to sell. They want to just rent.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And so that means that a young family is going to be not having the housing available to buy.
So out of all the states west of the Mississippi River, including California, the average state builds in, don't quote too rough, these are ballpark numbers, on average of something like 60% of all new builds are apartments, the other 40% are condos. Colorado is around 10 or 12% for condos. So we're right around a third or maybe 25% of what all the other states are doing for condos, which also shows where the problem is, because right now, even in a place like Delta, you're looking at $1,500 to $2,000 per month for rent.
Yes.
In Denver, it's going to be $3,000 to $3,500
Oh my
for rent.
goodness. Yeah.
And you tell me, what types of jobs can you really have that pay it? Because the advice I was always taught in school is that no more than a third of your income should go to homes, so
Right.
whether it's mortgage or rent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you're paying $2,000 or $3,000 per month, you better be making $6,000 per month, $10,000 per month.
Mm-hmm.
While those are good paying jobs, those are probably not entry jobs.
Right.
Oh, they're not your Walmart, your Costco,
Yeah.
and your Sam's Club
Nope.
jobs.
Which makes me wonder, how do young people, how do old people afford
Right.
that as well?
Right.
It's difficult. I'll just use my son-in-law and daughter as an example. My daughter works TSA in Denver. He is a Brinks company driver. They make a good wage. They still have to rent. They can't buy. Now that's
Wow.
ridiculous. They have one son that's will be well, he is a senior this year. His in-laws, their in-laws, my daughter's in-laws, live with them, and they help subsidize their housing by buying groceries and that kind of thing, and they still cannot buy a house in Denver. Now, is that, I mean, this is typical. So where are people going to be?
No, we question that all the time. And I mean, we need more condos on the market, not more apartments. And the Democrats' solution to this is a bill that they proposed but failed. We were able to kill it this year.
Yay.
And that was to tax and put a limit on VRBOs or Airbnbs or short-term rentals, depending on what term you want to call them.
Right.
That is really scary for Colorado because our entire ski resort industry has developed on the Airbnb model. I mean, long before Airbnb was created, the ski resort industry developed this way.
Yes.
So you look at, for example, the Sheraton up in Steamboat Springs. Each individual unit is owned by a different owner. And then the management company is Sheraton, who of course gets to put their name on the building. But when you want, your essentially your share of the building, you show up and you get it because you own it. And then when you're not there, you can rent it out, and that of course lowers whatever you're paying for mortgage or
Right.
maintenance fees for that. And that helped build up the Colorado ski resort industry. Otherwise, the new big developers at that time, when we were starting to build up in the 60s and 70s, they were not going to write a $20 million check.
No.
But many families got together and said, I could spend $100,000 for that second ski home and be in a condominiumized model. And then, of course, it's a great source of income for many Coloradans as well. And the average person doesn't rent out on Airbnb that long.
Okay.
Usually it's a parent who's passed away. They're not ready to sell. They're going to try the Airbnb model for a while. They realize it's really hard. I mean,
Right.
cleaning up after people and watching your property get destroyed or worn out day in and day out. That's why most of the time Airbnbs don't stay on the market. So the people that keep an Airbnb there year after year, they've really been dedicated to basically having a small hotel.
Right.
And now Airbnbs are subject to the lodging tax, so it's not like they're not paying their fair share. And so the Democrats' attempt to go after Airbnb, saying that will provide more homes in Colorado, is a fallacy.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. So a real easy fix to some of that would be on a condo, say, you're liable for a year after it's built. You should be able to see any real defects within a year. And something easy to propose and fix if they were willing.
Yes.
That's what a homeowner's is.
I
When
know.
a contractor builds a home, there is a year time period in which the homeowner can come back to the contractor and say, look, this is a problem. We need it fixed. And but then after that, the contractor liability ends. So it should be the same way.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, you talked a little bit about crime. What are some other things that have passed that have happened that have led to more crime in the state? Because we do see an increase and we do see a decrease. I know the other day Kennedy was saying it's hard for them to recruit police officers because they don't want to be in that profession
Yes. So
or quality.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, actually it was in 2020, the special session in 2020. It was Senate Bill 217. And that created personal liability for an officer who acts beyond the scope of their job. It caps at $50,000, and the department can actually indemnify the officer for any payouts. While I believe we struck a pretty good compromise there, it's unfair because it's the only provision in state law that targets law enforcement. B, the officer could be on the hook for up to $50,000, and they don't.
Which is a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. It could bankrupt most officers, and they don't know what's going to be considered within the job and not within the job, because a lot of this is still highly debatable when you go to court, even though you think it's well settled. And if anything, their career is probably going to end just because they're being taken to court and they're being used as a show trial experiment.
Yes.
And that has led to people saying, you know what, I may be paid $90,000 locally to be an officer, but it's not worth it. Already they put their lives on their line every day. I mean, unlike members of the military, a soldier is only in the theater of war for so long. I mean, typically we don't keep them in theaters of war for more than 6 months, sometimes a year. And then they come home. And then their mind can actually be at ease when they're at home. Whether they are or not, they at least in theory can be. A police officer never has that ability. For the entire 20 years that they're working until they're retired, they're going to be at a heightened sense, which is why most police officers have a much shorter lifespan than most of us, because most of the time when they retire, it's just the full impact of they can actually, for the first time, sleep for a full night instead of being at this heightened sense of, is my pager or cell phone going to go off that I need to rush in for the next emergency? Is someone going to try to shoot at me or my family? I mean, that's the type of thing that they live
I
under.
never thought of it quite that way. That is something. They have to suffer the
PTSD.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Couldn't say the
Yeah.
initials there, but yes, they would have to. That would be an ongoing thing.
Well, and I think the respect and the fact that it's hard for them to be everywhere that everybody wants them to in a timely manner. Everybody thinks, I know I would. If something's happening at my house, I want them right here. But they have to prioritize, and I might not be the top priority. And so that's difficult too.
And then when they see the state legislature pass bills like this that does not show them respect, it's a major slap in the face. I mean, it would be much better if the removal or limitation on qualified immunity applied to all government actors, but to just target law enforcement, and it wasn't even all law enforcement, it was all non-state law enforcement. So the state patrol is exempt, the CBI is exempt, even federal officers like the U.S. Marshal Service is exempt. So it only applies to
Local police
and the Sheriff's Department. So this was the biggest slap in the face because of that. I mean, I've always heard that a key principle in the American legal system that we should always adhere to is equal justice under the law. And it's not equal justice under the law when you're both in law enforcement, but because you work for the local police department, you're subject to having qualified immunity removed. And because you work for the state patrol, you're protected.
Yeah,
Right.
true.
Right.
That's true.
Right. Oh. And so, Matt, how do you think that the state has contributed to inflation for us on the Western Slope especially?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, directly, there's probably not a lot where the state has contributed to inflation, but there are a few key areas where we definitely have. So, for example, new regulations and limitations that have been placed on Suncor, which is the oil refinery over in Commerce City near Denver, has added to our rising cost of gas prices and airline prices also in Colorado, because they produce almost 100% of all the jet fuel consumed at DIA or Grand Junctions Airport.
Wow.
But they also produce well over 2/3 of all the gasoline and diesel used in Colorado vehicles.
Oh, I didn't realize
Yeah,
that.
and so what happened was they had a fire at the refinery, And at the same time that they had the fire and had to shut down, the legislature was adding all these new air quality standards to Suncor, measuring different parts of the state, trying to attribute it to Suncor, which is not true at all. I mean, it's completely a misnomer to say that they have caused the air quality even on the western slope to be bad when they can't trace it, but they can trace something from a refinery in California. It just does not make sense. Or China even. We've been able to trace some pollutants from China even. But then the refinery in Salt Lake City was also offline. That's also owned by Suncor. And it was a real experiment for us to see on the western slope what happens when the two refineries that are supplying gas to the western slope are offline briefly. And there was a moment in time earlier this summer when gas prices were hitting $4 a gallon.
Right.
And what the Democrats did to try to prevent people from realizing what life is like if we actually don't have refineries nearby, Polis activated emergency funds, and we subsidized the gasoline prices to artificially lower it, even though the supply and demand would have actually seen Colorado gas prices probably hitting $5 or $6 a gallon.
Wow.
And so the taxpayers subsidized that so that we live this complete fallacy that everything is just hunky-dory in Colorado.
That's interesting because, yes, most people think that it's fine, that there isn't any issue.
Well, and we'd also had Brad McLeod on the other day with XL, and he said, with the new smart meters, part of what the smart meters are coming on for is because our three major places where we get our energy are coal.
Yeah.
And they have to close those by 2029, and they have to find alternative green energy, which is more expensive and less reliable. And so that's combining the two is going to create a higher cost for us.
Well, it's already started. I mean, talk about inflation on our energy bill, for example. So if I look at the price of coal over the last, say, 10 years, the wholesale price has been relatively stable. Then I look at the price of natural gas over that same 10 years, relatively stable. Cheaper than coal, but still stable. Crude oil has also been relatively stable. I mean, we've had peaks and valleys on the charts during that time, but overall, if you pull the full 10-year graph, it's been relatively stable prices. So if you know your input costs are relatively stable, then you'd have to look for some other reason for why prices have gone up. Well, we haven't built new gas-fired power plants or coal power plants in this state. We have the coal-fired power plant up by Craig. We have one over by Pueblo. We have a handful of gas power plants throughout the state. They're not new, but they have been around for this same 10-year period. Their costs should be controlled because it's not like they're paying for new construction costs. So which means that even whatever it costs to run the plant should be solid by this time. So we have two known prices that are coming in. The only thing that's changed is the state has told companies like Xcel they have to change their mix of power. So instead of being able to buy from stable sources, now they're going for solar and wind, which is far more expensive. And even though it's subsidized, it's still far more expensive than natural
and whenever
gas.
you subsidize, you're getting your subsidizing from us.
Exactly, yeah.
So you're taxing us,
Yep.
and then
And-
you're charging us more.
And not to knock Xcel, but I will. They don't really care because they just, whenever a new mandate comes through for more solar, they're like, okay, they'll find a way to build it. They just add it to the customers' bills because they've been granted a monopoly. And they, at the end of the day, they don't really care to fight this in the legislature because they're like, okay, we'll just add it to the bill. And that's what's caused our electric bills to go up and thus inflation, actually an artificial inflation because it doesn't have to happen.
Right. So, we've been Debbie Downer. What were some good... I mean, we could go into... Well, one more. Has illegal immigration, affected us on the Western Slope much or not so much?
I mean, we've always had a fair amount of illegal immigration that's happened here. I do not see that it's at a higher percent than it's been at any other time, say over the past 10, 20 years. Denver has seen more illegal immigration coming in. As a matter of fact, they've welcomed it to come into Denver. The Democrats passed a series of bills to, for example, create the Office of New Americans. They are funding about $26 million in total to welcoming illegal immigrants to our state. And I find that just appalling, to tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I sat back one day and I figured out that they could afford to charter 50 flights filled with business class seats for the price of money they were spending on the Office of New Americans to bring people into Denver, if they chose to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just a good example of where I don't really see that I get anything free from the government.
No.
It's it's a high cost game to live in Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
and it's, to me, pretty offensive that someone is able to get quite a few handouts from the government when they come to our state. And I believe it sets a really bad precedent too, because it means that when you're arriving for the first time in this country, yeah, you may say it's the land of opportunity. If I say, here's a cell phone, here's a toothbrush, here's a bottle of water,
Mm-hmm.
now the next guy is going to help you get a home, and all this is going to be paid for. Well, you're going to think, well, this is really great. Why would I even, A, get a job,
Right.
B, be a productive member of society,
Mm-hmm.
C, even remotely attempt to make good on your immigration status,
Mm-hmm.
because from your perspective, everything has been given to you and the red carpet's been rolled out, and you're like, oh, this is great here. Let me call and invite a few more of my friends.
Yes. Yep.
Let's bring the uncles and aunts and
Yeah.
the cousins. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I will tell you, Colorado is not alone here, unfortunately. I mean, there's
Yes.
many states, well over half the states are doing things similar.
Mm-hmm.
It's a trend that is happening around the world. I know in your intro you mentioned that, I've traveled abroad and have met with foreign officials, and I've learned a lot from these trips. I was in Germany back in March, and I learned from talking to elected officials from around Germany, they're having the same problem. That because their government is wanting to pay for so many, whether they're legal or illegal, so many immigrants from outside, that the system can't support them anymore. And that citizens are starting to rebel at the ballot box.
Mm-hmm.
And they were really concerned. And it's like, well, you've kind of created that problem.
Right.
Yes.
But it also is why Europe is complaining about seeing so many more, they call them extreme right-wing parties. I don't know if that's true or not, but at least more anti-immigration parties emerge.
Mm-hmm.
And they are really concerned because they're really close to taking power, whether it's in France or Germany or the Netherlands. They are definitely seeing this movement of, we can't afford to pay for people who don't work, who come to our countries, who don't want to assimilate. And that's also what we're feeling here in the United States. So we're not alone, and it's really good to see the fact that the rest of the world is sharing the same experience, that no matter what good-hearted person is in charge at the top, whether it's in Colorado or in France or Germany, you can't give away the treasury.
No.
No, that's just, it seems incredible to me. You push people hard enough, they're going to rebel.
Yeah.
And they're causing their own demise.
Mm-hmm.
Well, kind of that was the Constitution where England kept saying, no, you can't charge for us to come into your port. We'll charge you to go into your port, our port, but you can't because you don't have a good government.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about it?
So 200 plus years ago, here we are again.
Yeah.
So tell us some good stuff so that we
Sure.
can,
Please.
and especially since you stay in the fight, and we appreciate that. What are some good things that are happening? in
Yeah,
Colorado?
I mean, there are quite a few good things happening in Colorado. I'll tell you about a few of the bills that I was able to pass. One that I was very proud of concerned testing accommodations for people with disabilities like dyslexia, or it could be a physical disability. But we were having a real problem here in Colorado, because what would happen is on, say, the CDOT Flagger exam all the way up to the state medical boards of the bar exam, the testing officials would tell these individuals, no, you don't need an accommodation, even though they could see a history of being granted accommodations. And they would say, well, we want you to undergo one more test. Well, as an adult, these diagnostic tests are very expensive and can be $5,000 to $8,000. And basically what the state was doing was saying to anyone who is not perfect, either physically or mentally perfect, we're going to create basically an economic class. And if you're wealthy enough, then you get the privilege to sit the exam with the tools you need to pass. And if you're not wealthy enough, then we're going to say, thank you for spending your life savings to get an expensive like medical degree or law degree, but you won't help our state by practicing. Instead, we'll force you to do something well below your degree level.
Goodness.
And it was really frustrating, maybe not so much with the law and medical side of the equation, because that's such a valuable degree that you're going to try to fight. But the CDOT Flagger exam was the worst, because we've worked really hard to develop a Take-Two program. I was actually the bill sponsor back in 2019 or 2020. I can't remember, the years start to blend. And it was really tried to reduce recidivism in Colorado by getting guys in prison skills and actually starting to work while they're in the prison system. And it's undergone some reform since it was created. But one thing we've partnered with is state jobs. So the state Flagger exam is one of those. And believe it or not, there's an exam and you have to be certified to do it. It's not just like anyone can stand out there holding the pole. There's a little bit more to it.
To it than that, right.
But in prison, once you start learning the CDOT Flagger course and what it takes to do traffic control and be aware of what's happening, a lot of times guys who are in prison are dyslexic. I have heard somewhere in the neighborhood of like 2/3 of all prisoners are dyslexic. And there's kind of a reason for it, that if you struggle with reading or mathematics in school, you're not going to get good grades. If you don't get the support you need, you easily fall to the wrong crowd. And then you get in trouble and end up in the prison system. I mean, there is something logical to it as well. And if the CDOT Flagger exam was telling the individual, we're not going to give you a time accommodation because we don't recognize that you have dyslexia, then all the work that we've been doing to reduce recidivism is for naught. And so we passed a bill that told the state, look, you can't force someone to have additional expensive testing to prove their own disability if they already have documentation that they can show that they have that disability.
Okay, good.
Nice.
And so that was probably the biggest bill I got passed.
That was good.
Other major things that we were able to work on and accomplish this year was a really reform of Colorado's funeral industry.
Yep, that was a big one.
Yeah. So
much needed.
Is that your Aunt Em? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go into the legislature to reform the funeral industry. That was never my goal.
Oh, good.
But as I was first elected in 2018, I remember telling victims of the Sunset Mesa funeral atrocity, look, if I'm lucky to be elected, we'll do something about this. And this was now the sixth and indirectly seventh piece of legislation I've passed impacting the funeral industry. And two of them, or arguably three of the bills, were the most significant. So one requires licensure of all workers in a funeral home. First time in 41 years that this has been required in Colorado. We're the last state to require such. So it's never good to be last to anything, but at least we won't be the outlier. Well, as far as regulation, we'll probably be somewhere in the middle of the pack of states, because this is the thing about having a Republican lead reform. I didn't want to overregulate. And I also wanted to have the profession self-regulate as well. So a concept that I actually thought of while we were having a stakeholder meeting was, instead of having the state have these individuals look over your shoulder to see if you're competent to do what you say you're going to do, like embalm or cremate, that why don't we have peer reviewers? Have the industry themselves police themselves, much like the law industry polices themselves, and to still have it be under the protection of the state, but you actually have now the industry involved in self-regulating. So it's kind of a blend between state-regulated and self-regulated.
Well, it's probably less expensive too
It is, yes.
than having somebody hired to watch over that. And we have to create a department with 2 secretaries.
Yeah, it is. But funny story on that. So Representative Rick Taggart, who represents Grand Junction, he's really sharp with numbers. And as we were presenting the bill before the Appropriations Committee in which he sat, he comes to me and he's like, Matt, I really want to vote for this, but I can't vote for this. And I said, why? What's wrong? It's like they want like 6 EV cars and charging stations. And he shows me like way down in the fine print of the fiscal analysis. I'm like, for this bill? And I look at it and it's like, yeah, this is this bill. So I was so mad. I walk into the hallway, call the bill drafter, got an amendment, striking out that appropriation. And then I talked to the department and I said, just so you know, here's the amendment. I'm going to run it. We're going to strip off all the EV stuff. There's no way that can be in here. I said, I understand you want to convert to an EV fleet and to allow all state employees to have a charger, but I was like, really? You want our bill to be like the first of the rollout?
Good job.
Yeah, I was like, do that as a
Good job,
standalone
Rick.
bill.
Good job, Matt.
Yeah.
Gotta
Yeah.
watch them all the
Yeah.
time.
We need more like you.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Well, you said you had a couple of things on Constitution Day. I know that you've done other good things, but we've taken a lot of your time. So, what things did you want to say about Constitution Day? Because for viewers, Matt is going to be with us at the Central Library on Tuesday at 5:30, and he's got a presentation, and then he's going to engage the audience in looking at some constitutional questions. So, what did you want to say about the Constitution?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to give a teaser, I guess, for the 17th. And really just sort of talk about some of the things that we'll be talking about during my Constitution Day, I guess, talk or lecture or address, whichever we're terming it.
Mm-hmm.
I really want people to focus on maybe some things about the Constitution that they don't think about every day. Really the concept of dual federalism and how we have a state government and a federal government, and it was the states that created the federal government. And so what wasn't created by the federal government is, what the states didn't give to the federal government is limited. What the states reserved could be expansive. And so the federal government does not have a general police power, but the state government does. And that's a concept that I think people kind of forget, that they see the federal government as being all-encompassing, this very powerful entity, and it is. Don't get me wrong, but the way our founders created our great nation was not that way. It left a lot of power and control with the states, and then really the federal government's main function was to regulate relations amongst the states and to regulate relations amongst nations. And those were the 2 core principles of having a federal government. And those principles haven't changed. They play out every single day when I'm in the state legislature. We talk about these concepts, and they're not static concepts that exist on a piece of parchment. You see our Constitution play out in a beautiful way between Republicans and Democrats, quite frankly, because when we're sitting in the state legislature, we talk about how we have plenary authority to govern on behalf of the citizens of Colorado. But yet, we also talk about things like, well, is this area of law preempted by the federal government? Or is this an area where we can write laws on? And a good example would be the state wanted to regulate patents when it concerned pharmaceuticals. They wanted to have a shorter patent term. And the pushback was, this is preempted by the federal government. And the reason why it's preempted is in the Constitution, Congress is granted with the authority to issue patents and terms of patents. And that is an enumerated right of Congress and not for the states to infringe upon. And it's those types of debates that remind you every single day of just how important the Constitution is. We talk about the Dormant Commerce Clause. So what the Dormant Commerce Clause means is, as a state, we can't treat citizens of other states less favorable than our own citizens. However, we can treat our own citizens less favorable than those of other states.
Huh.
Now, if we do, there's another constitutional principle that may come into play depending on the scenario, and that would be Article 4, the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the Constitution. And that's a protection for citizens where you would be able to say that if you have a privilege or immunity in one state, that should carry over to the next state. So if as a state we're treating our citizens less favorable than, say, someone in Utah, I might be able to argue under Article 4 that based on the Privileges and Immunities Clause, my own government should at least treat me the same as that other government.
Right. Very interesting.
Well, things I don't know.
I'm sure we'll learn a lot.
Oh,
on Tuesday.
I'm sure of that.
Yes.
It's going to be excellent.
Yes. So do you have anything else, or you have anything else? 'Cause
I don't have anything else. I mean, he's touched on so many things that are very important to us, and I know there's a lot that we haven't touched on, so we're just hoping to get you back again.
One last thing. Because the election is in November, what is coming on the ballot that we need to be aware of? Because I almost forgot that.
I'm glad you remembered.
That's the $1 million question. So hopefully everyone has their spectacles for this ballot. Not because it's going to be a spectacle, but because it's a really long ballot, and we have a lot of initiatives and referred measures on this ballot that we're going to be voting on. Probably more initiatives and referendums than any other ballot in state history. It will concern everything from an excise tax on ammunition to one concerning school choice, another one that concerns funding local law enforcement from the general fund of the state. Another one concerns making sure that someone who's accused of murder would remain in jail until their trial date. Another one also on law enforcement says that you would need to serve at least 85% of your prison sentence. Right now, I hate to say it, but Colorado prisoners, some are serving less than 20% of their prison sentence, which is really unfair to victims and to the general public. If you've been told you're going to serve 20 years and you only serve 2 or 4,
right.
That's pretty bad. There's going to be a question on abortion. There's going to be a question on, let's see, there's a few other things. It's a long list.
So where can people, make sure, because what we found is oftentimes you don't get all the information that you need to make a good decision just reading whatever the issue is. Where would you suggest that people that want to make an informed decision, especially ahead of time, go to know?
Yeah, so Colorado produces what's called the Blue Book, and every voter will be mailed out a Blue Book in advance of their ballot. It may be kind of long, or if you want to get a preview before it's mailed to you, you can go to the General Assembly's website, and under the Ledge Council tab, it will say the Blue Book for 2024. They'll have a PDF copy that you can read. I like the Blue Book personally because it gives you the ballot language, and then the two sides of the issue have each laid out their best argument. And so you can read the pros and the cons for why you should vote yes or no on the particular ballot measure. It's a way to really kind of see what the proponents are thinking. I mean, I may have one reason why I'm voting, say, for truth in sentencing. You may have another reason. You may oppose it, but at least the Blue Book kind of lists why those that push for it to be on the ballot want you to vote yes, and why those who are fighting on the no side want you to vote no.
And I know that there's been some criticism of the Blue Book that it does not necessarily reflect a more conservative view.
That's true. I don't know that that's uniformly true. I think part of the problem is who's involved with submitting the arguments that make the Blue Book. So you get these large consultancy firms, these big political shops, and they'll have the description or arguments written by usually some Ivy League educated lawyer who's being paid some crazy amount. And they aren't really thinking about what is the common person
concerned with,
maybe. I mean, concerned with. I mean, they may argue a very technical piece and completely miss the elephant in the room. And yet that's what ends up in the Blue Book. And the language sometimes gets sued over and debated, and sometimes you don't have control there. But the committee that approves it is made up of both Republicans and Democrats, and is the only balanced committee in the legislature because it's 50-50.
Okay.
So they...
So that's our best shot.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
All right.
great.
Good enough.
Well, we appreciate your time.
absolutely.
And you've been watching Mesa County Compass. This is the facts as we see them, the truth as we know it. You decide.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Matt, very much.
Thank you.